Hello everyone, I am Sergio Maldonado and this is Masters of Privacy, a set of interviews covering the intersection of marketing, data, privacy and technology with a clear goal in mind, which is redefining the relationship between people, brands and media around transparency and control. Which is to say, we're aiming for real customer centricity, or if you will, human centricity. We regularly talk to DPOs, CMOs, CDOs and whoever else we find interesting and able to share valuable insights. So we hope you like it. Please do reach out if you have any ideas on future topics or speakers. Okay, there is this thing that we call the Newsroom, in an act of defiance and originality, in which we discuss news or updates on 5 specific topics. I am bringing it to this channel today, hoping to make your life easier, save you time, and make sure everyone is up to speed before we jump on our next interview. The 5 topics are as follows. The first one is ePrivacy and regulatory framework, so sort of legal updates. The second one is MarTech, or marketing technology, and AdTech, or advertising technology in a privacy-first world. The third one is competition and digital markets, so competition as it affects everything else in this space. The fourth one is zero-party data and customer centricity, so empowerment, agency. And the last one is the future of media and creators in this sort of creator economy. So now we're going to dive in. Okay, we're starting with ePrivacy and legal updates. The European Union and the US announced a transatlantic data privacy framework aiming to replace the now dead Privacy Shield, which used to provide legal cover for personal data transfers to the United States, before Max Schrems, an Austrian citizen that you may have heard of, used a lawsuit against Facebook to question his rights with regards to surveillance carried out by national security officials in the US. In their case, they act under the cover of Section 702 FISA, or the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is a US law. Now, the latest episode in this legal battle, which we will simply call Schrems 2, like everybody does, and that was the July 16, 2020 judgment of the Court of Justice of the European Union, had also resulted in requiring additional safeguards for the Privacy Shield's primary alternative to send data to the US, which is standard contract clauses. Schrems won, by the way, the prior court case with the same plaintiff had already ruined a previous framework called Safe Harbor, if that rings a bell. Now, it does seem like the newly agreed framework will grant EU citizens sufficient safeguards with regards to electronic surveillance in the US, but all details are still being ironed out, and the EDPB, the European Data Protection Board, was quick to point out that the Schrems 2 judgment still applies. In essence, this means that using MailChimp, Google Analytics, Airtable, Salesforce Marketing Cloud, last time I checked, and many other software as a service tools which store and process data on US soil is still extremely risky and hard to bring into compliance. I won't get into the added complexity of the more recent US Cloud Act, which obliges any US company to share data with US authorities even when such data is being stored and processed in the EU, as is the case with Microsoft Cloud Services, Amazon AWS, SendGrid, and many others. That could result in many more headaches. Now, we cannot leave Luxembourg just yet, because the Court of Justice of the European Union found recently that consumer protection associations don't need to specifically identify one of their members as the subject of a GDPR violation in order to bring legal action. In fact, they don't even need to demonstrate a specific infringement. It will suffice with the fact that such harm could happen in light of a particular company's non-conformance to the GDPR's rules. The third one, and this is perhaps the most important one in the short term, is that we have a Digital Services Act coming, and we are still missing the final text of the law, but we have many drafts. We've had plenty of time to debate it. We've discussed it in a few interviews on this podcast or the Spanish channel for this podcast. And importantly, the Digital Services Act is going to ban ads that target people on the basis of special categories of data. So religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, political affiliation. So Article 9 GDPR. In fact, some of the large platforms had already sort of in a self-regulatory mode done this, discarding these categories like Facebook did recently and Google has been doing. So all of these categories are disappearing. I believe now they're only available in places like TikTok, which is pretty much the Wild West. But slowly, everyone is going to be discarding them. Something else that is happening is that nobody can target ads to minors. So another big important change. And this is also happening at the other side of the pond. As we know, there's plenty of initiatives in the US to do the same thing. Now, something else that is equally important is that the law is forcing Facebook and large platforms to give people an alternative to profiling so that they can see a different feed that is not based on recommendation algorithms that people won't be able to understand. So we'll see how that plays out. Now, in the US, going back to the US, the FTC commissioner and chair, Lina Khan, who was appointed by Biden, she joined our colleagues at the IAPP, the Global Privacy Summit, so the International Association of Privacy Professionals organizes that every year, and this year it happened in person, as many of these conferences are finally getting back to life. And she warned about the dangers of surveillance advertising. So she's following that sort of more radical approach to all of RTP. And she was pretty strongly advocating for the end of, data collection by large platforms and so on. Luckily, she had someone from her team, from the FTC, who has another point of view, and that's Noah Phillips. So one she's been appointed by the Democrats, Noah Phillips by the Republicans. But I think he brought plenty of common sense by saying that bad actors aren't just the big guys, and that small players sometimes do the most harm. And that you cannot just call everything surveillance advertising, since some of these things are pretty legitimate, some of these uses of data for advertising. So he was more moderate. Okay, moving on to MarTech. What's happening in MarTech and AdTech? So Google deployed the reject all cookie consent button across a few countries in Europe, following that fine that they got in France, 150 million euros from CNIL, the supervisory authority in France, because because you had to go through more clicks. Let's put it like that. You need to click on a few more places to reject, and apparently that's not free and unequivocal, and all of these conditions that we have for valid consent under Article 411 and others in the GDPR. So in the end, even though, yes, this is ePrivacy, and there's people out there continuously saying, forget GDPR, cookie consent is ePrivacy. Yes, it's ePrivacy, but ePrivacy is requesting consent, and consent was redefined by the GDPR. So it's both. And we do need to look at the GDPR to understand valid consent, even though it is ePrivacy that is forcing us to use consent as a legal basis. So in any case, Google finally deployed that reject all on the first layer, and it's only a matter of time before everyone has to do it, which means sample sizes for any tool that is using consent as a legal basis or being forced to rely on consent is going to suffer in terms of, again, sample sizes. Now, another piece of news also in MarTech AdTech is that Apple is expected to start policing fingerprinting under ATT, under Apple App Tracking Transparency rules. So, probabilistic attribution, as it's often called, will be controlled. We don't know for sure how that's going to be policed. It's easy to simply, stop sending the IDFA when people do not agree to be tracked as per this prompt on apps after ATT. But now it's going to be harder. And of course, we also had a chance to have a look at the Android Privacy Sandbox, which runs parallel to the Chrome Privacy Sandbox. And clearly, it shows an easier path to enforcement in terms of fingerprinting because there's this new thing under the Android Privacy Sandbox called the SDK runtime that allows Google or Android to monitor what's happening within that SDK separately, so you can approve an app, but you can control the embedded SDK separately and make sure there's no privacy infringements or anything that runs counter to their policy. Something else also on the Google front. Now, Google Ads are now requesting appropriate consent from every one of their customers. So Google could even disable an account if they warn you and you don't take measures and you're not using consent for things like remarketing or conversion tracking. All of these things will require consent. And again, Google is going to be enforcing this. Also, on the Google Analytics front, as many of you know, Google is forcing everyone into using GA4, which doesn't store IP addresses anywhere anymore. It stores most of the data in Europe before some data is sent to the US. There's a whole new change in terms of the data flow. And Google Analytics will allow people to disable what's called Google Signals, so that you can disable that in your region when there's no consent. Of course, people will lose cross-platform reporting, remarketing lists, some of the advertising reports, features, demographics, interests, all of this data that in fact comes out of joining ads data and analytics data, that'll be gone. But you'll have to use that if you want to comply or follow some of the guidelines that we see across various countries, including France, and specifically, and of course, if you want to avoid consent under the analytics exemption, to call it like that, to call it something. Now, Shopify announced Shopify Audiences for something that is very interesting, which is combining the conversion data across multiple merchants so that they can then target people that are likely to buy all together on Instagram or Facebook by doing, again, lookalikes, but you can use the entire pool across the whole sort of Shopify environment. And then, of course, these people won't be able to see other merchants, the customers that other merchants are bringing into the pool. You can see only whoever was your customer. But it's a pretty smart move because Shopify data will be deemed first-party data with regards to ATT, and Apple, and others. So it could be pretty powerful and perhaps a step in between before Shopify starts building their own standalone ad network of sorts. We'll see what they can do. In any case, something else happened as well. I did mention the Android Privacy Sandbox, and the last thing I'll mention is that TikTok has introduced third-party cookies. And yes, it's as crazy as it sounds. Just before they're gone, there was just no other way for them to show that their product actually works and for people to attribute some conversions and events back to their campaigns on TikTok. People were pretty much in the blind, so they had to do something. They introduced a pixel. So now you've got third-party cookies on TikTok. Just like that, 2022. And now we've got brand new third-party cookies. Moving on to competition in this space, in the digital space, Apple, they keep insisting on the fact that the App Store is not a monopoly in any way. And Tim Cook also joined us at the Global Privacy Conference, but basically to lobby against this idea of so-called side loading, where you don't need to go through Apple to install or to the App Store and give them 30% and go through this dark sort of black box of a process of getting approval. So good. I'm pretty happy that we start pushing Apple to open that up, because it really is, a dictatorship, if you ask me. Then in terms of zero-party data and sort of customer centricity, then Google is launching a new preference center for ads so that people can now manage their privacy settings, opt out of personalized advertising, sort of anticipating itself to all of these legal changes. And you can even specify whether you want to see fewer ads on a given topic, or even, I believe, filter out some of the advertisers. So it's pretty powerful in terms of giving people some agency and control. Now, separately, Stripe has introduced financial connections, as they call it, to allow people to retrieve banking data, transactional information from their own bank account, so they can then allow merchants or third-party companies that are using Stripe's platform to sort of adapt their services and products to them, so that they can get better services by sharing some of the transactional data, by opening that up, sort of an open banking platform. Now, on the future of media, and that's the last section, and I'll shut up, Meta, so Facebook, will start paying creators for their original content on Reels, which is their answer to TikTok. And we were pretty sure something was going to happen in terms of creators in this new creator economy, as we keep saying. So now that's their move. TikTok, on their part, did something as well. They introduced something called Pulse, and that's a new contextual advertising product that shares 50% of its revenues with creators. That's it for now. Thank you for listening. I'll try and have someone with me next time so it's a bit more bearable. See you next time. Cheers.